everybody. We are very fortunate today to be hearing from Gaynel, who is a human rights expert. She is currently an independent expert member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. She has spent decades working at the United Nations, both in Geneva and New York City, and she was, for a time, the very best director of the Department of Gender and Family Affairs here in the Bahamas. She is back with us, chosen to be back in the Bahamas working with us, pushing forward. Very grateful to her for that. And again, very fortunate to hear from her. So pay attention, get your notebooks out. We're gonna learn some things.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? I should ask if you can see me okay. I want to bring it down a little bit, but okay. So let me apologize for being a bit late. I had a family emergency that threw everybody a little bit off. My eldest brother had a bit of an incident today. Took him to the hospital. But I'm happy to be here and to share a few words with you and all the running that I had to do to get here. I think I should start by centering myself. And I hope you will give me that moment.
Want to do some breathing exercises?
I'm going to be okay. Thank you so much. So I usually start most of my presentations, and some of you have heard me before, by centering myself, and today in particular, I feel I need to do that, just reminding myself of what I do and why I do it. Is that better? Yeah? Should I step over a bit? Would that be better? Yay, I was off to the side a little bit. So let's begin. A little something I wrote. I dabble in poetry sometimes. I don't know if I'm that good at it, but I dabble anyway. Navigating spaces, negotiating to enter and thrive in workplaces, hoping to receive as I give good graces, but often rejected, disrespected, undervalued, invisible, on the basis of the skin I am in. Black, woman, Caribbean, Bahamian, still standing on the shoulders of my enslaved ancestors, once kissed by the Africa's sun. Working, still working for human rights, dignity, respect, equality, justice. That's economic justice, climate justice, reparatory justice, gender justice, yes, racial justice. Justice for all those with traces of faces that look like me. Colleagues and friends, good afternoon. It is an honor to join this critical conversation on the future of democracy. I thank the organizers for allowing me to share a few thoughts on the topic recognition, justice, and development in the democratic process. As many of you may know or may be aware, the second International Decade for People of African Descent officially began in January of this year under the theme Recognition, Justice, and Development for People of African Descent. By people of African descent, I am referring to African diaspora populations, including African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Latin Americans, Black Canadians, descendants of mostly enslaved West and Central Africans brought to this hemisphere some 400 years ago during the transatlantic trade in enslaved persons. This theme, which also forms the genesis of my topic of discussion today, serves as a global call to action. to address systemic racism, combat racial discrimination and violence against people of African descent, to acknowledge the rights and contributions of those people or peoples, to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, an agenda which was silent on the rights of people of African descent since its inception in 2015, to deliver on reparatory justice, an agenda to comprehensively address and provide effective remedies for past and ongoing harms stemming from enslavement, colonialism, and other systems of oppression. So despite efforts and many initiatives undertaken over the years, much remains to be done to engender the full enjoyment of all human rights and benefits of development for all human people, all human beings, and all people of African descent. Data and lived experiences of people of African descent show that they continue to face systemic racism, racial discrimination, multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, and I think specifically about the intersecting realities of Black women. And they experience these inequalities in almost every segment of their life, undermining what I call the foundations of democratic societies. Many of the countries in this hemisphere will say today that democracy is a reality in their societies. However, the concept remains a disputed one, as there exists a multiplicity of perspectives in understanding its content, what it actually means for each of us as human beings in this hemisphere. In my role as Vice Chair and expert member of the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, my colleagues and I tend to take a human rights-based approach to democracy. So for us, democracy is more than elections, not only as it relates to people of African descent, but to all minorities, to all marginalized and vulnerable groups in our society, to all on the periphery. In our view, limitation to the realization of democracy as a system where the people exercise rule through participation, election, development, societal progress, is linked to the broader limitations of inequalities, fundamental rights and freedoms that are not realized. Democracy is at its best when human rights are protected, respected, and promoted for the enjoyment and the realization for all, and I mean all human beings. According to the UN, democracy includes respect for all human rights and fundamental freedoms. And they list, and I will go through that list with you, inter alia: freedom of association, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of expression and opinion, freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and belief, the right to be recognized everywhere as a person before the law, and the right to take part in the conduct of public affairs, directly or through freely chosen representatives, the right to vote in a pluralistic society or system of political parties and organizations, and to be elected at genuine, periodic, free and fair elections that allows equal participation of men, women, and all. Universal, I would say universal and equal suffrage, and by secret ballot, so you do not have to expose yourself or become challenged by who you vote for. It is about respect for the rule of law, the separation of powers, the independence of the judiciary, transparency and accountability in public administration, decision making, and free, independent, and pluralistic media. And I think we've heard a lot of what's been happening in the media, not only here, but globally, where we want to say we need a free media, we need a free civil society, we need an open, involved, engaged civil society and media in order for democracy to be at its best. While we can say in the Bahamas that we have achieved or are working to some degree on most of these rights and freedoms, many people of African descent and people generally do not always enjoy these rights. I think of countries, communities, and individuals are still often at the bottom of, people of African descent are still often at the bottom of almost every socioeconomic global index. I just returned from a mission to Colombia. And Colombia, if some of you do not know, has the third largest Black population in this region, second to Brazil and the United States of America. And Black people in Colombia, people of African descent, do not feel the level of freedom that we feel. They've had many years of war, though they were not the instigators of the war, the perpetrators of the war, they were most affected by the war. Mothers have lost their sons and husbands. Children have lost their fathers, not because they were fighting, because they needed that land. And even since the war, we have, for an example, the drug cartels who are moving in and taking the lands, displacing people. And the challenge for people of African descent is that they are not considered peoples, a community, collective group of rights, as indigenous do in that region. And that's a serious concern that must be recognized. And the permanent forum, when we promote the rights of people of African descent, during this decade in particular, we're embracing something that Fannie Lou Hamer quoted, nobody's free until everybody's free. So when you tell me that you're running from your land because you're being chased from the cartels, and you run to the city and you get to the city and they say, we have no space for Black people. Blacks are not allowed to rent here. And you're trying to find a space, mostly women and children, trying to find a space to live. That's a fear. That's a real fear for them and a real concern for me. And as we discussed at the very highest levels of government, we had Blacks in senior positions of government, civil society, the media, in tears, talking about what their realities are. Again, nobody's free until everybody's free. Our call for reparations during this decade must also center on Haiti. We cannot be free if our Haitian brothers and sisters are not free. There can be no reparations without Haitian restitution. And I'm talking about the repayment of the independence tax, as well as the reparations for enslavement, as well as the continued systemic racism that they continue to face in that country today that causes the international community to become blind, deaf, and dumb when it comes to them. Yeah. It must stop. So, before we can address, really, in my mind, the democracy's freedom and the future of democracy, including reparations and restitution and all the countries and peoples that we know that are challenged, and we have in our own country some people that are challenged, so we'll get a chance to think about those. We must confront the uncomfortable truth about our past. The system that we currently have as our own was developed without us. Our local democratic processes and the international political and economic order was developed without us. Yet we still struggle for our voices to be heard on equal and equitable footing as others. I served 24 years in the UN. It's a long time. So I had a lot of time to have these kinds of discussions as to why the system itself needs to change to ensure equity and equality. This is a constant reminder of why we need to work, how we need to work, and what needs to happen if we to truly improve the democratic processes, inclusive of our global community, and also our own realities. We have accepted the status quo. with very little change, despite the fact that the world is a very different reality for many, many states. Many of them did not exist at the end of World War II and at the birth of the United Nations. This is a different reality, and we still exist on a system that is outdated and outmoded and needs to be changed for real democracy and real change. We are a different nation than we were at the birth of democracy in these islands of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Much different than we were at emancipation. Much different than we were during the Burma Road riots, during the women's suffrage movement, and much different than we were at independence. And according to an anthropologist, Michael Rolfe, this observation cuts to the heart of why people of African descent continue to struggle within systems that claim to be democratic. The histories we've been taught, the narratives that shape our understanding of democracy, have been constructed by those who held power, effectively silencing the voices and experience of those who were subjugated. When we fail to acknowledge this history and seek actively to change it, not in a philosophical way, but in a real sense, we cannot understand, we will not understand what the data and the lived experiences are for people of Africans until we get there, until we deal with issues of multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, until we look at what life is for reality for every group within this society. We understand why minorities, marginalized, vulnerables remain in the periphery of democracy rather than in the center of as active agents of change. So the change is happening all around them and we're going along with the tide, but oftentimes they have no say in what that change is outside of a vote every 4 to 5 years. It must be more than that. And I'm waiting to hear Matt after me briefly before I have to run, because I know he's going to talk about those issues as well, what it means, right? And so who's on the periphery? And Alicia, I'm sorry I wasn't here for your discussion, because I think a big part of that, and everybody would know that I'm a gender and women's rights advocate. You know, do we really have gender equality in the country? And where are the remaining challenges? How can we have that in law and in practice? That is a crucial part of the democratic process. So to give democracy its full meaning, we must know our history. We must be willing to reassess, reopen, rethink, critically self-assess. We must live up to and fully implement the international and regional human rights treaties and agreements that we have accepted. And no, they're not necessarily Eurocentric treaties and conventions. They're very much negotiated by us in the region, us in Africa, others that look like us. We're at the tables when these negotiations are happening. So this is us. And we get to choose which part of that we want. But we cannot stand on the periphery of it and say, I want this, and cherry pick and say, you can have rights, you cannot. And that's what we do when we think about nationality rights. That's what we do, right? When we think about the rights of LGBTQI persons, you can have rights, you cannot. You can have rights, but so far. If you're married and you happen to be raped, you have no rights to bring your claim to the court, unless you're also beaten and abused in some other way. So there's a lot that we need to do, and it's grounded in the work that needs to happen with human rights. We have ratified a number of treaties and conventions. We must seek to implement the hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of recommendations that have come to us internationally, regionally, and locally. So we've been hearing these recommendations and we've been sitting on them. And that is very unfortunate. We have the roadmap, and we are not prepared to implement. And that's a challenge for us as a country. That's a challenge for us globally, because we have the exact same conversation globally. But we must ensure that human rights are for all human beings. That's really the essence of it. Starting at home for us in this room. The questions for me that are key and that I continue to ask, and I've been writing about the culture of rights for many, many, many years, are all in our society fully recognized? Do we all have an adequate standard of living? Be honest to that answer. Do we all have housing, food, water, and sanitation, running water in our houses? Do we all have access to health, including mental health? What about the quality of education? Is it even for all children? Those are the questions we have to ask if we really want to talk about a true democracy. Is justice a reality for all Bahamians? Or can you have a special compensation if you happen to belong to a certain class? If your family has some wealth, if you know some people? Ought not to be. It has to be across the board. Is development inclusive? Are all ships in the harbor, and I like to use this one, are all ships in the harbor rising with the tide? They're not. They're not. It depends on where you live, who you are, who your parents are, all these things. At some point, we have to say, as a people, Bahamian people, what democracy means to us. And it has to be more than, as I said earlier, that voting every couple of years in the election season that we know that's coming up now. It has to be about how our brothers and sisters in this community live. It has to be about the increasing inequalities. It has to be about increasing poverty. Until we address that, we're not really addressing or fulfilling the democratic process. The separation between democracy and human rights laws and standards and principles must be corrected first. The Permanent Forum on People of African Descent continues to work on these rights globally. Throughout the decade, we will continue to do so. And we do that with people of African descent in mind, but not only. We work closely with Indigenous and other minority groups. I've been doing extensive work on women and girls and what it means for them in terms of their rights to be realized globally. It is imperative. I stand ready to work with you, and I speak to government representatives, UN representatives. I see my good friend back there, Anissa. I stand ready to work with you. Representatives of civil society as well. Academia. We have to know, write, share our history. I stand ready to work with the business community because they have a role to play in this, huh? They're not exempt. They have a role to play. Such a thing called corporate social responsibility. You're not just getting rich or running your business. You're also ensuring that all the boats in the harbor rise. So I'm ready to develop initiatives to promote this decade for the rights of people of African descent, the human rights of people of African descent, and for all human beings. Right now I'm representing people of African descent, but I'm talking about all human beings. I'm ready to work with you. Building a culture of rights is building a stronger, sustainable, democratic process, inclusive democratic process for this country. Thank you for listening, and I'll take your questions, if any. No? I don't know if this one comes off, or I don't want to disturb it. No, that one stays.
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, so I can unmute everyone else might be able to. Dr. Thank you so much for that. I have a question. What do we do
perhaps well-meaning government do when people not even don't care about their own rights, but actively don't want the rights that are being promoted or offered? What do we do in a case where people are generally kind of fighting against the implementation of some of the amazing things that you spoke about? And I agree with every single thing that you said, and I know there are many more that you didn't. But the reality is there are some people who might say, no, I don't want that, and I think you should have it. What do we do in a democracy, right?
And that's a good question. You know,
As best you can, could you sort of paraphrase the question, because we got only one mic for this session in question
okay.
before you answer.
So what can we do with those persons who may feel that those rights aren't for us? Those rights aren't for me. And I mean, we had it. We had 2 referenda. And Bahamians said, I don't believe that those rights are for me. And women said, I don't think I should be equal to men. No, I shouldn't have, equal rights to pass on my nationality to my spouse or my child. And that's the reality of what we do. But the biggest step that we can take, 2 things. I think we need to educate. I believe a big part of the last 2 processes was about education. Either the issues were maybe over people's heads or people just didn't get it. And because I had an occasion to travel to some of the family islands after, I was away for the referendum, the last one, both, but especially the last one. And I had a conversation with women in some of the family islands. And when we sort of started talking about what that meant in reality for them, they were like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't quite understand that. So the messages were blurred. The water was muddied, whether intentionally or not, it was. And it misguided people into what it is they were voting for. I still believe that the most important thing for us to do is to raise awareness and educate. And I think that education shouldn't happen when we get to be adults and we start to vote, by the way. I believe that education needs to happen much sooner about the issues around equality. I worked with Anissa at the Department of Gender. And we did a couple of my first harassment and a few other initiatives where we actually went out and spoke to high school students and 11 and 12-year-olds to ask them if they understood what harassment meant. And what was shocking for us coming out of that is on average, children, particularly girls, begin being harassed at age 7. So we know that the work that needs to be done has to be done much sooner, and it has to be done for boys and girls. We cannot wait for them to become adults to start talking about these issues. So I think education is key. Some of the work that's going on, I think that a lot of it is continuing with the help of the UN and other partners, but there needs to be more education. Even lecturing, I'm going to be quite honest. I'm surprised at some of my students and what they say, and their lack of understanding of what it means for equality, to have equality in society, or at least be working toward equity, right? And there's this perception that, well, you're bringing in these foreign thoughts and ideas. I disagree. My grandmother, who grew up, who was living on Hay Street, understood what it meant to feed the hungry, to take bread and pass it around the neighborhood, to walk around and give people, to ensure that when she cooked, she saved a plate for Miss Miller or Miss Johnson, who didn't have enough, right? So that's human rights, that's engagement. So we can't separate it as this highfalutin thing. It's not that. It's in our everyday lives, right? But the best way to counter this is through education and awareness. We cannot educate enough. And, the only way you can counter it is really with knowledge, right? People make these kinds of decisions because of a lack of knowledge. And where there is no knowledge, no vision, people perish.
Very interesting, and I enjoyed it, this presentation.
Thank you.
What's your rationale for the voting being secret ballot? But does it have to be secret all the time, or sometimes you want to know if that person is representing us properly, other than a representative vote? And there's a lot of cases.
Oh, I was thinking us having as citizens having secret ballots, us being able to vote secretly, not have to say what we want. We didn't always do that. Our historians here could tell us. We had public voting. You had to say, I vote this way, I vote that way. And the reason why you have secret ballots, of course you know, is to protect people. You should be able to vote for whom you wish without feeling the repercussions of it and the political, backlash for voting a particular way. So I am for the secret ballots. I don't know that our parliamentarians have secret ballots in the House. They're supposed to get up there and represent us, saying whether they agree or disagree with the bill. I know many of them may not, or some of them may not openly oppose their political parties or whatever the case may be, but they're not secret about it. They speak on a bill, on an item, that's before the Parliament. So yeah, I don't see it as secret. I see what we're doing when we go to the polls as secret. Now, if we choose to put on our colors and boldly go out in red, yellow, green, what's the other one, black or whatever, or purple, right? We decide what we want to do, right? And we are saying, I choose to openly indicate who I am, and that's the part of freedom of choice, right? But you shouldn't be forced to put on your color or you can't vote. Put on your color or you ain't coming to this poll. Tell me who you're voting for.
Yeah, I like that answer. I was thinking mainly of the people who represent us, because I know in a lot of organizations, the leaders, they have secret ballots and secret voting, and you don't know if they're really representing our views.
Well, they shouldn't be voting secretly in the Parliament on issues which affect us. They have to give their opinion. Now, whether their opinion is going to be their real opinion is another issue, because we tend to express our opinions based on party lines. That's the way the process is here. But it's not a secret what they think. If they stand up to speak on the budget, they're supposed to be saying how that budget affects their particular constituency, the persons who put them there to represent the people in that constituency. So it should not be secret there. The only secret ballot I'm talking about is your right to have a secret ballot when you go to the polls and not be forced to indicate who you want to vote for.
Leaning a little bit into the title of Future of Democracy, I'd love to get your thoughts, particularly from your perspective, about the trend that we're seeing globally, moving towards more authoritarian leads in the interest of supposedly the people, that tends to disregard or erase a lot of the human rights movement efforts that have happened. Where do you see that, and what are our takeaways from that?
I see what I see mainly from that, and I've been trying very hard not to get into affairs of others, but just to say what I see mainly from that is the reality of exactly what I spoke about. Where rights are not protected and respected and promoted, it's easy for authoritarian leaders to dismantle them. So you can be working on the civil rights movement for 50 years, and in 2 months it's dismantled. And because those rights were not entrenched enough in society and believed enough by members of society that they needed to be protected, then you could easily have that falling away. I'm reading this book now called Tyranny, and it's very interesting because a lot of what I see now, and I have some other history people in the room, I love history, that's my first degree. And so this time reminds me of the 1920s, the rise of the Nazi government. They didn't take it by force, by the way, they were voted in. And the people voted for them. And the people voted for communism across, in many parts of Europe. They voted that we wanted a communist government. Many, not all, many. And so they were ready to take that leap because they had lost confidence in the system that existed. And so the easiest way to get that traction is to pit people against one another. And I see that happening right now. I don't claim to be an expert on it, but I see this as something that we ought to be taking very seriously. Because when we talk about authoritarian leadership, we're talking about almost total dismantling of the human rights of people, and the little people, the everyday man and woman in society, they're totally ignored in the process. And it's about big business, and it's about if you're in the right party and those kinds of things. So I think we have to pay attention, and this, I always say that this is not a time for us to sort of throw our hands up in the air and say, oh wow, this is crazy stuff happening all around. I think this is a time for us to step back and think, and to perhaps pivot, and to say, where do we want to go from here? What kind of society do we want? Right? What's going to be important to us? As I said, these processes that were established, the World Bank, IMF, UN, all of it, was established without us. They have their veto power and all this stuff without us. Right? We're in the General Assembly with one vote. But the reality is that we have an opportunity to think about how we want to engage these processes. And how I think there's enough support from developing countries for them to begin to think about how they want to change the trajectory of the UN and how it works. We don't have the money, but we have the numbers. And that says something, I think. If you think of all of Africa, all of Latin America, the Caribbean countries, much of Asia, not all, that's a significant number of countries, right? And would we have to guard against this, to divide and conquer? That always takes place, right? They give us $3 more and we throw away everything. But that's why I said it's important for us to know our history, agree on what the history is, because history is being rewritten and erased. Because they're talking about shutting down libraries. I had the great fortune of working for the UN in many post-conflict societies. That's the first thing they do. I was in Afghanistan, where the Taliban basically burnt every book they could find. I was in East Timor, where Indonesia pretty much burnt the entire East Timor. Just burnt everything to the ground. Books and all. I was in South Sudan, where, again, efforts were made to just destroy everything that reminded people of who they are, where they came from, who their ancestors were, all of it, and to keep people on the run, right? So we have to be mindful of these types of authoritarian societies and what they do, because when you don't know your history, you're bound to repeat the failures over and over again. So I really want us to see this as an opportunity. I see this as an opportunity. Me, to perhaps build new allies, and to see whether how strong our relationships are. Some may stand, others may not, and we may not necessarily have to maintain the same relationships on every single level of our lives. We're allowed to have other friends to play with too, right? We don't have to play with the same kid in the playground every single day, right? So I think that this is an opportunity. I want to see it as that. I see change as an opportunity, change as positive, change as where we have a chance to do something different, something better, come together and be stronger. I see 3 hands, 1, 2, 3.
But isn't that the farce though, right? So for me in particular, I can't call what we do here democracy. I cannot call what we do here education. When you talk about that, right? And isn't it the farce though? The farce is we can't play with everybody else, because there's this one big kid right next door to us who we have to literally ask if we can allow Cuban nurses or teachers to come here, which is wild for an independent country, that you're waiting on a response from the US to tell you whether you could have Cuban teachers come here because they're upset, right? Or they don't want this communist ideology, right? When it's not communism, it's fascism, right? And so I think for us, we need to take off the rose-colored glasses, because this is not democracy at all. What we're doing is a performance. It's a liberalism, right?
we're playing as if we're doing democratic things. And we know for sure that the people who are in charge, I'm talking with the ones who have hold of the political apparatus, right? And the thing is, we know who those people are. We know the families. We know this. But we pretend as if we don't know this thing. And I think that that's the thing that really gets me in the Bahamas, is that we're all pretending to be shocked and clutch our pearls when we know the person and what they believe, because we know his mommy and his daddy. And we know what they think, right? Because they be in our houses, right? And so I need us to stop pretending like we don't know. Because watch this. Some of us rub shoulders with them on Sundays. They're over at our houses. They ain't over at my house. But they're over at some of your houses. And so for me, like, I need us to really stop pretending. Because we know how this thing works. If we can stop pretending, because then what it does is that's a form of gaslighting. Because I'm in the room like, everybody cannot be seeing and hearing this. Because we know what's going on. We know why there's we know how Lincoln Gaynels have gotten here, right? But what I think we're not willing to do is accept our role in birthing that kind of thinking within Bahamian society, right? So that's fascist kind of thinking where, and even when I had the chance to speak with Lincoln Gaynel, I was telling them, I said, you're using language and you don't understand what you're saying. And even, like, I kept telling them, you're xenophobic, your rhetoric is xenophobic. He's like, I'm not xenophobic. And I'm like, yes, you are. And that lets me know that our education system failed. It failed him.
Yeah, and I mean, and I hear you on that, and a part of it is pretending. I believe it is, and I agree with you, that we are, at moments, pretending. And that's could be seen as faking it till you make it, I don't know, but it is sometimes pretending. But I think a lot of it is a lack of knowledge, in truth, about what the realities are and what they can do and how they can actually change it, what difference they can make, right? And so I know that this is not democracy means different things to different people, as I said. And it's a reality in different spaces. But I know that it will take different shapes and forms, and it's a process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. We inherited this, and we haven't changed it, really. Not much, have we? So, when I see this as an opportunity, as I said, for us to think about what we have and how we can shape it differently to suit who lives here, to suit ourselves. It's not going to be perfect. And it's a kind of, I always say, kind of weird thing. You're building the ship you're building the plane as you're flying it. You see? So it's not complete yet, but you have to move. And so this is how I want to take it. It's not going to be perfect, but we have to keep the process moving.
You said earlier that a great amount of Bahamians don't realize that they have a right to democracy outside of their vote every 4 to 5 years. I can think of, off the top of my head, 3 different ways that people can exercise their democratic rights: signing petitions, joining protests, volunteering with community organizations. But it would be nice to have a resource list of ways people can actually participate on a higher level, because, right, that really is going door to door 8 years ago. That is what people believe is their only one chance to show up is at the voting of the general election polls. So, I mean, like you said, public awareness, public education campaigns, but this is cool, right? But the average Bahamian, what's going to attract them?
So this is an opportunity, I think, for us to think a little bit out of the box. We tend to think the same way about it. We're trying to use the same old solutions to solve even newer and newer problems. These issues that we're trying to address, the system is old, the people are new, right? I mean, what existed, I don't know, before my daughter's time is not a reality. And her vision of what is democracy and freedom is totally different from mine in terms of what does freedom mean to our youth. But this is a process of talking about it, engaging, having people involved. And that's why when I say education, I do mean not only education in these types of settings where we're exchanging ideas, right? But I'm thinking education in terms of the academic process. I was very pleased to see that we have our own history book for the first time, which I think is fantastic, written by Bahamians. From our eyes, our views. That's what we need to have. We need to have our Bahamians talking about what the environment means to us, right? Have our own scientists thinking about how do we develop, sustainably, and what that means in terms of environmental sustainability as well as economic and social development. We need to engage the process. So I think it's not going to happen overnight, but we need to keep the conversation. We need to keep the conversation started, and I think it has started. So people like yourselves, actually, you have done a lot of that sort of using the bullhorn and shouting, "This is wrong on children's rights," right? And so we now have the Marco alerts, and when they come out, I think of you guys that have worked on that, right? I do. Because and so it may seem small, but those are the types of things that need to happen. Right? Where you find an issue. I always say, I'm going to say this. I think politicians get into politics without having an issue. Yeah. I believe you need to have an issue. Stand on your soapbox and preach that issue. Your one issue. Right? And make change on that one issue. Not just following the party lines and yay with the pom-poms. What is your issue? What are you bringing? What are you hoping to change? How do you hope to develop this society? What group of the economy, which section of the economy you're trying to move? What is your thing? And so that is about democracy as well, right? So how do we get leaders that are thinking differently and not just following the party line? And one more question in the back.
Oh, sorry, yes. A few points. Sorry, just trying to solve a problem.
Sorry.
Yeah. So you notice you mentioned the situation with Indonesia, the Nazis in Germany. There's a handful of things I wanted to mention about that. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why, for instance, the Federal Aviation Administration of the United States has so many rules, regulations, and procedures in the event of whatever should happen or should not happen, or who can fly and who can't fly, is because all the rules are written in blood. Somebody died to cause that rule to happen in the first place, including our situation with the Marcos alert. Like, a child had to be brutalized in order for that to become a law and for that mechanism to even exist. A thing that is noteworthy is, to be told, the Nazi Party never formed a majority in Germany. Even with the coalition government, they tried to form. It still wasn't a majority. Hitler was also never elected chancellor of Germany. He was appointed. But the whole purpose of it was...
Nazis won the election.
They didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't. They still didn't form a majority.
They made a coalition government, so that was it.
Because they banned, well, not banned, they kind of had the Reichstag fire. They killed the communists. And if you went in parliament, you can't represent nobody. So now we by default.
But the people voted for them.
But they still
had votes.
They didn't form a majority. In 1933, voted. Check the public record, they did not. And I say this for a reason. Mm-hmm. The same situation with the situation in Indonesia. Mm-hmm. All of these examples that you highlighted, the political actors, whether they be the Indonesian government supported by the United States to kill communists, mm-hmm. right, and burn books and genocide people. Yeah. All of this is the use of violence, whether it be for political ends or not, as a means to take control of a political system. Mm-hmm. And I'm bringing this up because the reason, unfortunately, this is not my idea, this is not my theory. Yeah. There's a political theory that the way that political systems develop is through violence, through bloodshed, through iron bucking up into iron in the first place to create rules. And one of the examples for my presentation I'll be using is Jamaica. Mm-hmm. The reason why Jamaica has campaign finance reform laws, they have laws on who can donate to political campaigns, you have to register, there's laws governing the behaviors of political parties, is because Jamaica had violence in the streets. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Trinidad. Yeah. The Bahamas never had. I'm not saying that we need those things. I'm just saying our political system only lurches forward at all because of some external force exerted on the government, which is why we're reactionary, or civil unrest within the country, which in recent memory happened twice, I think. Yeah. And things changed because of that. But I'm just saying, and I'm not advocating for this, but I'm just saying, in the current gridlock system you have with the two-party system, the only language that seems to be understood by this system is violence.
And perhaps you're right, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think violence is the only way. I'm hoping that we, can learn from the experiences of others. Why do we have to fall in the same hole in order to learn? I mean, that's just my thinking, right? And so perhaps there has to be blood on the street. I think that's how media worked for many, many years too. If you weren't leading, you weren't leading, right? And so it doesn't have to be that way. And because it's been that way for 100 years, it doesn't mean that it needs to be that way for the next 100. We have the power to change it. We have the power to change it. And for me, as I said, there was a lot of violence, without a doubt. That's why I was there. I went into post-conflict zones to deal with, and that was it. The violence was against the people. And the people in Indonesia, in East Timor, for example, voted against the Indonesians, which is why they were burnt out, right? So, but we don't have to wait for that violence to be in the streets. Why can't we learn from the experiences of our neighbors? Why do we all have to fall in the same ditch to learn that that's a whole?
I want to add to that. So there's something that I think that I've been noticing amongst like a lot of countries. We also have to realize, I want us to get in the habit of understanding or seeing violence as not only physical, right? There's structural and symbolic violence.
Psychological?
Yeah, psychological. So I'm talking about structural, institutional, all of these violences. And so even when, one of the things that I raised on Twitter, and then I had St. Lucian Twitter coming for me because I literally said that the Caribbean, when somebody had posted that the Caribbean is a peaceful place, and I said, peaceful where? And I said, and if you understand, you said your first degrees in history, from before Haiti could even go into that whole Haitian Revolution, military ships were already on their way here, to the Caribbean for that. And then even after Haiti had gotten their independence, you talked about them again, there were also warships sent by the US that waited on the coast. And they went and they stole all of the money out of Haiti during that time when it was civil unrest. And they took that and they formed Chase Manhattan, or the First National Bank, which is now Chase Manhattan today. And we don't think about the plundering of Haiti's economic wealth, right? We don't think about all of the military bases that are in the Caribbean itself. One being, we had two here, right, at different junctures. But we're not thinking about violence in this very structural or symbolic way. And I need us to get that, because even when there's no physical violence happening, there's racism still occurring. There's gender inequality. There's class inequality. And those are forms of violence.
Yes, and I agree with you. They are forms of violence. I would definitely agree with that. The psychological violence is something that we don't speak about very, very often. So thank you for reminding us of that. I'm being wrapped up. Do you have any other questions?
Very last question or comment from anybody? Okay. Please give Professor Perry a hand. Thank you so very much for your presentation.